Welcome to Brain Wellness, the podcast. I'm your host, Mandy NP. What started as all things related to brain health and wellness has morphed into largely brain injury health and wellness, with occasional other neurological topics. My mission remains the same, to help you on the path to a healthier brain. So, without further ado, let's get into the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. My guest today is Dr. Daniel Avesar. Dr. Avesar is a brain injury survivor and advocate dedicated to raising awareness and promoting understanding of brain injury. When he was 18 years old, he was in a car accident. I'll let him go into more details of that, but that marked the beginning of a 7-year journey to rebuild cognition, gain his inner self, and address vision challenges, plus dealing with other problems like derealization and hyperacusis. These experiences led him to study neuroscience, seeking to understand the profound changes he had undergone due to his own TBI. He earned his PhD in neurophysiology from Dartmouth College in 2013 and completed a postdoctoral research at the University of Oregon in 2017. Since then, he's been interviewing brain injury survivors as well as researchers and clinicians to create free online content aimed at dispelling misconceptions and increasing public understanding about brain injury, both from the internal and external perspectives. He has a couple of projects online, which we'll get into later as well. Just want to thank you so much for being here today with me, Dr. Avesar.
Thank you. And thanks for speaking to me. Please call me Daniel.
Daniel, excellent. Thank you. So, Daniel, as we were talking before we hit record, the first question I have for you is the same as I always ask everybody. How did you get to where you are today? And there was a little bit in your bio, but just whatever you feel like sharing. Yeah,
it's a long story short. I had, a brain injury, severe brain injury. I have a plate. About a third of my skull was removed. And then I had this with brain injury, you have all these changes, and had this long progression of figuring out what was wrong with me, and then learning how to slowly progress and work on what was wrong with me to restore it. So it wasn't just the brain injury that was weird. It was that first 7 years, it was like all these changes that I kept dealing with and learning how to deal with. And then, the formula, if there is a formula, became this slow baby step progression of what I couldn't do and what I wanted to do, and also learning not to hit the fatigue, because the fatigue was so overwhelming. It's like nothing else I ever experienced. And I've spoken to many brain injury people about this. So then there's all these changes. Then at about 7 years, I was like, okay, I don't like, these are normal, but normal in the sense that I could think I had regained a lot of what I lost. And at that point, I was in this phase of hiding what I had been through, but secretly trying to understand it. And then as I was studying neuroscience, it was partly denial. Denial is a weird thing, but I was trying to understand what happened to me, studying the neurosciences, getting into discussions. I realized no one, or at least in that time, I felt like no one understood what I was dealing with. And the deeper I got into neuroscience, the more I was formulating my view of it to understand what had happened. And then I thought, okay, I got to do the PhD, and then I got to do the postdoc. And then I was in the beginning of seeing how to compete for faculty, when I realized it's not about this. It's always been about my brain injury, and I was hiding that. So then I had to take a step back. And I also had the emotions that I didn't really, it's alexithymia with brain injury. So I didn't feel much of anything for about those first 17 years. And that numbness went away, and all the emotionality led me to connecting with people, and also realizing, what do I know? I know what I experienced internally. I know what I've studied. And I know, as I see different experts speaking, I would think, okay, they're either studying something that is consistent with what I injured, or it's a different part of the brain, but I still have a brain injured perspective of it. So that's something someone else could injure. And then as I started speaking to more and more brain injured people, I realized it was almost a premise in the beginning. I can talk about what I injured and what had changed in me. Can other people do that? And sure enough, I have found that very much the case. And I think it's a window into what brain injury is misunderstood, but if people listen and believe us, and also sometimes in the beginning, it's really hard to talk about and you're trying to make sense of it. But a lot of people I speak to after the first few years, some 30, 40 years after their brain injury, they know exactly how to explain it. And then I think that's what they need help with. That's what people would benefit from learning about. So the project became twofold: studying and talking to the researchers about what they're learning about. And that's the outside world view. And then the inside world view is the experiencing my brain perspective. Really, it's experiencing my brain injury. But so far, everyone I've talked to, and I've spoken to about 100 people off the record, many, many off the record, they can tell me what they're dealing with. And okay, that's the key. That's the window to what other people can learn, and other people can learn how to help them with. And so that's kind of the two projects I built, and I'm hoping to progress with that.
Yeah. So curious, in your 7-year journey, did it take that long to get diagnosis? Or was it
No,
kinda
no,
you
I mean,
identified symptoms as you went
I
along?
was in a car that had flipped and was crushed, and my head was crushed, so I had a skull fracture. My friends thought I was dead, and
Mm.
I guess police showed up in minutes, and then a helicopter showed up, and they airlifted me to Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, and I think they did a CT scan or whatever it is, but my dad showed up at the hospital very quickly, and he saw me in that state, and it was like, 50-50 chance, or he says that they said 50-50 chance that I'll survive, and he's not gonna be the same. But there was no, I've spoken to many people, some of the most recent interviews I've done, people, they don't know. I was in the ICU for a while. I was in a coma for a while. There's no, doubt. In a way, it's not good, but in a way, it's good because it's like brain injury. It's like from the start, like, I've dealt with a brain injury, and I've dealt with severe brain injury, and the progression and improvements were there was no question about that. So the changes that I've dealt with over the years, I've spoken to a lot of people who what they're dealing with reminds me of the phases, reminds me
Mhm.
in some way because it's almost too hard to explain. So then you hear someone say a statement or and explain something that reminds me of something that I had dealt with. It's like, okay, these things are similar but different. And that's why the focus has really been on the nature of brain injury because it's so misunderstood. And it's the misunderstanding is the second biggest problem, the first being the brain injury, second being how people don't get what we're dealing with. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm. As you've been interesting or, yeah, interviewing people in
Sorry. Yeah.
practice and research, how do you think that they have a misunderstanding of the brain injury? I guess that is
Hmm.
number 1.
In general, there's like this complete lack of knowing how to think about what the other person is dealing with. And if I kind of point out the different experiences I had, I remember this is sad but interesting. Like I remember I got I was in the ICU, then I was in an induced coma, and then I was in the recovery, and then the last unit of the hospital, I was in a bed that had a cage around it, and I start to remember that time. And like some of my family members, my dad says that when I woke up and started talking, I was talking to him. My family's from Israel. I was speaking to him in Hebrew about the people in the room, saying, "Who are these people?" So in his mind, I was reasoning and I was speaking about them in a
Mhm.
way that they didn't understand. So like my dad and some of my siblings think, okay, so he was fine. But my mom and my sister and other I guess my brother as well, they were like, all you did was talk about food, and it was clear that, my mom says I was like a toddler, so
Mhm.
she didn't understand what I was dealing with, and only until I started this podcast 18 years after my brain injury did we actually begin the discussion of what I was dealing with, and it was very strange because she also didn't know how to talk to me about it, so she says I was like a stranger, and she didn't wanna scare me, so she didn't know how to talk to me. For me, I was like, there's this double vision world. I can't think. I can't get information into my head. It was a real split between the outside world and my inner world. And I say now, I think I injured the networks of inner voice, but it was also thinking because there was about 4 or 6 months, I don't know how long, where a speech therapist was working with me to regain reasoning. And my mom says I was like a toddler at that time. Once the reasoning clicked back on, that's what I begin to remember. But anyway, I got, as I tried to talk to people about those experiences, including the therapies and if I had the good vision therapy that did experimental work with me that worked for my double vision, and that speech therapist that kind of understood the cognitive stuff, they didn't understand the other issues. So it began this process where I'm trying to talk to people about what I'm dealing with, and they're not anything that they're saying leaves me to believe they don't understand what I'm dealing with. So I learned how to hide it. I've learned the term is called masking because
Mhm.
I'm trying to get information into my head. I'm trying to get the gears of thinking to work. And over the years, as I went back to school, like at the disability services, I registered through there and I'm trying to tell them what I'm dealing with. A lot of feedback was like, you're missing the point. And then I learned how to hide it. I got really good at that. And then when I went back into the neurosciences, it was funny, like, any PhD or postdoc or researcher I tried to talk to about it, they would end up saying to me the same question, "Are you talking philosophy or are you talking psychology?" Because I was trying to talk about what I had experienced, but I realized they don't understand how to think about brain injury, and that happened over a dozen times and kind of insulting too, because I had worked very hard to recover and regain like, it's the hardest thing I ever did in my life,
Mhm.
and I know how hard it is. I've spoken to other people about it, and then I'll tell, some PhD about it, and they're like, "Oh, well, that's great. The medical science, cured you." So anyway, like, they kinda move on. I'm like, "No, no, you." So it's in my head, and I had, like, I devoted all my energy and strength and inner capacities to that work, and as I got better the other thing was I wanted to hide. I wanted to pretend like I was normal. I just wanted to be, I was 18 and early years of my 20s, and I was just trying to do what normal, or I keep using the word normal, but what
Yeah.
young men want to do and have friends and date and stuff. And so it was just like this hiding of all my problems. And I got good at that. The other thing I realized is that as I try to explain it, the people around me don't understand what I'm saying. So then it's not worth trying to explain it. And that continued until the support group I went to after I finished my postdoc, when I had a lot of, it was kind of like an emotional breakdown, but really it was the beginning of feeling all the sadness and all the pain and the grief. And I didn't even know that it was that at the time. And connecting with other brain injury people from the beginning, they go to a therapist, they go to a doctor, and they're trying to tell the expert what they're dealing with. And they would say, like, they're not being understood. And I was like, oh, I just related with them instantly. That was 17 years after my brain injury, but it was the same problems.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's an interesting comment on that people try to explain to their caregivers and the caregivers don't understand their
Yeah.
providers. Because I had been a nurse practitioner in neurology
Yeah.
for 12 years before my own accident.
Yeah.
And I thought I knew a lot. I thought I understood what I was taught in school.
Hmm. Hmm.
And what we as providers are taught in school is very minimal when it comes
Right.
to concussion. So we don't know all the intricacies. We don't know how many body systems truly are affected. And it makes more sense to me now,
Yes.
having gone through it, unfortunately. But even I, as I sat in the patient chair, couldn't describe it to my care providers. I couldn't
Yeah.
ask the questions that needed to be asked. I couldn't explain to them what I was feeling because I didn't even understand it.
Yeah, that's a whole, so I don't talk, well, I speak to people now in the early years because I try to give them recommendations and sort of build a connection with them and offer ways to slowly improve, offer ways to not make things worse. But it's the people who are in the 5 years to decades after that I can have these real
Hmm.
retrospective discussions. But in the first years, I couldn't make sense of it. But I remember, as like, for example, I get home from the hospital, have this double vision, I have all these problems. I began to see how bad my thinking was and my reasoning. And this is after the toddler phase, but the gears of thought, I couldn't get it to work. I would hit the fatigue. And then one day I realized that my inner me was gone. And I was excited to explain that to this doctor that I had seen in the hospital, I guess a neurologist. And I went back to talk to her at the hospital. And I just remember feeling like, oh, wow, she doesn't know anything about what I'm talking about. And then my mom remembers that discussion, and my mom remembers it as, oh, the doctor was very interested in what you had to say. But that's really not helpful when you're in that situation because I'm like desperate, clinging, and it's hard to ask for help. I wasn't good at it, but I had several efforts. And, literally after the first 3 years, I decided to just hide, and I got good at that. I got good at that in a way that it's almost like I'm going to give you a little bit of information. I'm going to assume they don't know what I'm talking about. And what's my goal? My goal was always to figure out, like, let's say in a thought process, I couldn't do the process, but I can get the answer and I can work backwards. Or I don't know. It just was a lot of this weird, the name of my podcast is Experiencing My Brain. That's the name of the perspective. It's like this inner observer looking at what's wrong, figuring it out, and then progressing in these tiny, tiny efforts. But the tiny efforts were the hardest efforts I've ever done. And you have to repeat them and repeat them and repeat them. And then once I started talking to other brain injury people, I projected what I had dealt with, and then they said, no, it's different. And then immediately I'm like, I don't want to make that mistake. So I learned how to listen. And a lot of people have a lot to interpret and offer about what they're dealing with, especially what would help them. Because what would help them, they've been thinking about, they've been running into this over and over and over again. It's not the first time. So that led me eventually to this idea of conducting these interviews. But the interviews, I don't want to just do a podcast. I'm hoping to use it as a ground towards something more, towards how to build a service to help people based on what they're dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any themes that have popped up about when things that people would benefit from knowing or what they would?
Yeah, I have, let's call them the themes, but I've walked away looking at it now as these parallels. And the parallels are like this. And so this is sort of like the framework I'm building. Number one, there's the brain injury problems, the core problems, the things that got injured, deleted, damaged, made harder to use. That is always, whether it's cognition or a vision processing thing, or maybe it's like parts of executive function or very specific. So there's this, I see these problems at the core and the people are relatively aware of it. Then there's the fatigue and the limit stuff that it's almost meshed with those efforts. So it's a separate thing, but it's interconnected with it. So there's the core brain injury problems, there's the fatigue. There's also this relationship where if you keep pushing your problems over and over, it leads to other problems. And I had that. I had that with, well, it's like a long story, but once my double vision got dealt with, it would come back anytime I pushed my cognition. And the double vision was first, then vestibular and nausea, and then the headaches. And so I learned don't push myself that far. It took me several years to learn that. So that's another thing, learning to not push yourself to the limit. And then there's all the psychological and emotional reactions. I have met people that have had like the alexithymia is injury to emotional processing. There's other versions of that, but that emotional response is accurate to what we're dealing with. So anyway, okay, so there's the core problems, then the fatigue, then the emotional response, then there's the awareness. I love having that discussion with people who, how did they learn what was wrong with them? And I'll hear all kinds of versions, but either they won't know how to make sense of it, or they interpret it as psychological, or they keep somehow information from the outside world led them to interpret their brain injury problems. And that's a key piece. So that's the fourth layer. And then the last layer is, how do you deal with the outside world not understanding what you're dealing with? So those are my 5 parallels of brain injury. And I keep hearing it and I keep seeing it. And even for me, for a while I thought, am I leading these people down this trajectory? Is it my discussion with them that's leading to them? But as I talk to them later or just listen to other content, I'm like, no, it's not everything, but it's 2 good 5 pillars to talk about. And it's the invisible stuff that we deal with. So that's like, I want to write about it. I want to pull out the pieces, come up with
Mhm.
ideas of how to write it. And then I guess that'll be maybe a book. I don't know. I'm not there yet. I'm
Yeah.
still in the early stages. Yeah. And I want people, I'd love for people to run with it because it's like these are consistent, and the misunderstanding has so many problems to it. The lack of people knowing how to at least give the other person some benefit of a doubt or respect towards what they're dealing with. It's such a big problem. So, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that the lack of understanding has so many different levels to it. Partly
Mhm.
just, I think people just don't understand.
Yes.
As I explained, I think in our medical training, we aren't trained well enough to really understand all of the different facets. We're taught the kind of red flags with concussion and things to watch for, but nobody ever really underscored the fact that it's not just a one-time event.
Right. Right.
And that's something that we're working on global levels.
Recently, yeah,
Yeah,
recently that's come out, and then like this, a lot of the new information is about thinking of brain injury as a chronic condition.
yeah,
So I think that that's an improvement, but even that it's a chronic condition of its own type. And I've met
yeah.
people, it's kind of 2 camps that I interview now. And it's not completely 2 camps, but in general, it's people who've had support and they've had like I have about 7 or 8 interviews with people who've had this progression of learning how to regain, rebuild. Some of them had experts to help them. And
Mhm,
oftentimes there are good professionals out there with a certain thing, or they know about certain things. And then the person who has that problem finds that expert, and then
mhm,
together they can really grow. But then the other group are people who've been anti-supported. Their
mhm.
family turned on them. They got divorced. Their parents left them. They leave them to their own. And it's really sad. It's really horrible. But I just keep meeting. It's like 2 of the same stories over and over. And, I had support. My parents were very supportive of me, but they didn't understand. I think they didn't understand how to think about what I was dealing with. I don't know what it was, but, like, as I do these podcasts, my mom said to me after one of the podcasts of a person who had regained, rebuilt, redeveloped a lot, my mom said, "Now I understand why you hid it from your
Mhm.
family." And I'm like, "Yeah, you guys are they're people who like to argue." And is a lot of people are like that, and I don't know. So there's all these layers to it, but the cool thing is that as I talk to people more and more, I'm finding this discussion and my ability to have this discussion with them is very much growing. So I
Mhm.
see it as like a service, or I actually see it as this would be a way to help that person with their surrounding experts and people who are around them that want to help them, how to build the connection with what the person actually needs. Because otherwise it's not understood. And I have all these notebooks that when I started to write, it was like a vomiting out of what I was dealing with. And it was really almost gross, and it couldn't make sense of it. And I was drawing pictures and then repeat it. And then I would shape, it sounds gross, but I'd shape the vomit into words that were like, oh, this is how to say it. And then I did that for years. I don't know. I have those books somewhere, but it was this trying to make sense of an invisible problem. And then as I got better at it, I'm like, okay, this is accurate. I believe this is true.
Yeah, yeah. I think the number one problem with concussion is the fact that
Yeah.
it is invisible. You
Yes.
I think people such as yourself that have the severe injuries, you've got staples, stitches on your head, whatever, you've got evidence that you had surgery. Sometimes that's a little bit more visible to people because they can
People
see.
don't see it. And I used to grow my hair, and
Yeah,
I used to color it. I would take a marker that was brown and I would color it. And for the most part, people don't notice it, but
yeah,
it is visible if you look for it. But like I did everything to hide it.
yeah,
Needless to say, it's still invisible. And
yeah.
there's many problems, but the two are it's invisible. And then when you try to explain it, they don't have a frame of reference. They don't know how to believe it. They don't know how to make sense of it. Like I have this water issue where I have this head pressure where I need to drink. And the more cognitive effort I do, the more I feel this pressure. And it's a very strange problem, but I've had it since the beginning. And anytime I explain that to someone, they would immediately say, "Well, have you tried not to drink water?" And I was like, "That doesn't really help." And I don't even try to explain to them the cognitive process. So there's nowhere for them to look to see examples that are consistent with that's the thing. The core problem example, you could have an injury to several internal processes and they're completely different processes. So then the outside world says every brain injury is different. But the
Yeah.
way that has changed in you is actually kind of similar to another person that has a different brain injury. That's why I think brain injury people can really connect about this and we believe each other. We don't have to convince each other. So then it's like it's almost like I talk to the brain injury people and there's a lot of really good discussion there. Then I try to talk to a person that doesn't have a brain injury. Also, I did my undergrad, then the PhD and the postdoc. I was trying to find people who understood, and everything I learned in all the lectures I went to, I was like, this is peripheral. This is at best, this is on the outside, and they've acquired good data. So they have a spotlight and they see this, but anything outside the spotlight, they don't know how to think about. And that keeps happening to me. Can I ask you a question? You know anything how to speak to the experts if they don't understand it? What's the best way to communicate? We know
Oof.
from experience, but we also know from talking to a lot of
Mhm.
people. So I ran into this conflict or maybe I don't know, maybe I make people defensive, but I don't know how to communicate it in a way that is open for discussion.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I have been giving lots of presentations to people that are also providers at my level as well. And the
Yeah.
best thing that I found is just to share with them what my experience was.
Right, right.
Fortunately or unfortunately, when they hear it from me, it seems like it's a little bit more believable because
Yeah.
I am also a provider.
Mm.
Whereas when somebody who does not have that provider history might not get that same belief because
Yeah.
they weren't a provider to begin with. And I think it opened a lot of people's eyes when I presented for my colleagues at the clinic where I work now,
Mhm.
because many of them hadn't seen anybody at their level that had had a brain injury.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they didn't think, for lack of better words, didn't think it was real.
Right. Yeah, yeah. The brain injury people I talk to have that let's call it different terms for that same concept, but they don't know how to it's not actualized or they it's almost like there's a dehumanization of the person, but it's relative to the problems. And then the crazy thing is because I see this over and over again. And the interesting thing is for every person that has their brain injured parts or things that don't work or things that are injured, they have a lot of strengths. So like some of my friends have excellent memory, and then their memory overcomes the other problems, and then you're doing a dance. You're like the amount of work I did those first 7 years, like I try to take information into my head. So I had to repeat the information over and over and over and over, usually about 12 times in the beginning to get it to be in my mind. And then getting the gears of thought just to do like in the beginning, I couldn't even do an algebra problem. So it was addition and subtraction and a lot of addition. And the duration of the addition would be the therapist called it cognitive endurance, and
Yeah.
that would lead to the limit. So I'm talking to her about processing speed and cognitive endurance, but I can feel the gears. I'm gaining awareness of the gears of the process. So for me, it's not processing speed, it's the actual process. And then that slowly grew and slowly improved and slowly it's almost like I built the capacity to have the fatigue happen later and later. And then once I could do some work, I would work for 5, 6 minutes at a time and then just back off. And I don't know where I was going with it, but I didn't feel like everything I was dealing with when I tried to communicate, they wouldn't get it. So then I just shut up about it. I just kept it to
Yeah.
myself. So
Yeah.
I was kind of using an example to make a point, but I got
Yeah,
deep.
no, it's good. I got to the point where I joke now that my filter broke in my accident, and I don't really have much of a filter anymore. I'm much more blunt than I used to be. So I call things out when I see it,
Mhm.
when I see misunderstandings, when I see lack of benefits for people. And as I've made connections all over LinkedIn, all over the different social medias, it's interesting to find other people who have had various experiences along the way. And it's nice to see other people who just say, "Hey, this is what my findings are, and this is what's going on, and I need to do
Yeah.
something with it." Because I
Yeah.
think all of us that have been through some sort of brain injury, we kind of have this little superpower afterwards that we feel like we need to do something about it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I
And,
think if
you
we
know, I was
all
in
kind of join
denial.
forces, we can make something of it, I guess.
I agree, and I think that finding a way to communicate it to the outside world for the benefit of this problem is where I'm at with it now, but forever I was hiding that and, or I don't know, I didn't wanna do it. Even with my podcast, the first, let's say, dozen episodes, I removed my voice, I removed myself, I just wanted the brain injured person
Mhm.
to represent what their problems were, and I didn't wanna be a part of it, and I realized, like, I think it's a fear and also, like, it's a vulnerability thing, but I was like, "I don't wanna focus on me, I wanna focus on the brain injury problem and just remove myself from the equation," but now I'm being more involved, let's say, or, representing myself because I also have a lot of thoughts, and they keep on happening, and, yeah, I think hopefully a alliance or connection between the unbrain injured side and the brain injured side, and the unbrain injured side understanding that the brain injured side knows a lot about what they're dealing with can be used to build up. You know, like for example, with the chronic condition stuff, the chronic condition can change. And if someone improves, they're going to need very different resources and less resources, but they're going to be different than where they were definitely in the first month, definitely in the first year, and so forth. And that assembly line or change needs to have a feedback where the person is listened to across the process and believed because um it's just I don't know why I just got good at I'm gonna keep it to myself and just like not share what I'm dealing with and so now the pendulum's gone the other way. I'm trying to share more and
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think when we're first injured, I can speak from my own experience. I didn't want other people to know that I was having issues because I wanted to be back to my old self. And I thought
Yes.
if I can just keep it to myself and I can get better and people will never know that anything was wrong. But the
Yeah.
problem with that is that when you have symptoms that then become chronic and they continue on,
Yeah.
there comes a point where you can't hide it anymore, and
Yes.
it's almost like you're revealing that you weren't being truthful this whole time. So then you have to explain, well, why weren't you being truthful?
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
gets to be uncomfortable as well when you're starting to realize that you have to actually talk to people about
Right.
what's going on. So that makes a whole different level of difficulty in there.
Yeah, and I like that, because that's the hiding it because you wanna be who you were, and then the shame of that I didn't realize that I had shame until way later, and I had to, like the way I rebuilt my cognition is also, like, the process that I don't know if I rebuilt my emotional inner awareness, but I gained awareness of it, learned how to tolerate the feelings, and then a lot of it was, like, in the rearview mirror, looking back at the different phases. But I remember in the later phase, it was almost like I came out of the closet, and because I had improved so much, people didn't understand. Well, then, like one of my friends who I lived with for years, he said, "Well, brain injury is not a problem because you're fine, and I've seen you." I'm like, "Yeah, but you didn't see all the work I did before we even met," and it was kind of insulting. And so then coming out of the closet in a way is like, well, what does that even mean? And I had all the emotions hit me in that like 17 year to I'm at 26 years now, so like the 17 now I'm better, but let's say the 17 to 24-year mark, and it was all this just pain coming out and crying and all this stuff that reminds me of other brain injured people, but I'm glad I didn't deal with that in the first couple of years. It was like I was numb and I just had no I had frustration, but I didn't have any other feelings, and I had the focus was like, I must improve." So when the emotions hit, people were like, "What are you why are you like this? What are you talking about?" And, my wife and my kids don't know what I went through, so it was very out of place, and I had to learn how to deal with it because it became so hard as I do the podcast, so hard as I try to talk to people, and so it was like but it was so delayed, so it really to another person, it didn't fit, but for me, it's like it's connected, it just took a while to get to, and I think it's consistent with how brain injury can be. My right side, I have this book, it's on, affect regulation and origin of the self, and I can't remember the name of the author, but he's pretty famous, Alan Shore, but he talks about the right brain involved in these 2 major processes, and I'm like, "Oh, I injured affect regulation, I injured the ability to feel," and then the loss of self was such a strange process. I think that I disturb the midline. Although my plate ends here, the midline self-creating regions, I truly believe I injured those networks. And there's also a lot of right parietal involved in that. And I was just like, I'm no longer me. I'm no longer whoever I was inside was missing, and I didn't know how to make sense of that. And over the years, I got used to it. But it was one of the craziest. It kind of broke reality for me because it didn't make sense. But if you think about it in terms of the brain, it does make sense, or at least it's a possibility and a likelihood that that happened, so
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy stuff.
That possibility is something that I talk to patients about a lot too. When they come
Yeah,
in and they'll ask, they'll say, I have this weird symptom. Do you think it's related to my brain injury? My first question to that now is always, well, did you have it before your brain injury?
right.
And if the answer is no, then yes, it's probably related to your brain injury because there's this funny thing that our brain literally touches every cell in our body.
Yeah,
So if you experience something after your brain injury that you didn't have beforehand, it probably is related to the brain injury. And I think that's the first part in having individuals feel heard and
yeah.
believed because, yes, they're being acknowledged that this thing is new to them. So, yeah, it's different life now after the injury than it was prior.
And that change is so extreme and so internal, and, brain injury is a mind injury in a way that you can't explain it. The only people I've been able to have a discussion with about this stuff who haven't had a brain injury have are people who've done a massive amount of psychedelic drugs because the way reality has changed for them, and, some of them are doctors, some of them are like one of my family members was at Berkeley, and, there's a lot of it's, like, highly educated, but they've gone deep into that ayahuasca
Mhm.
and, I don't know, I don't wanna list all the drugs, but the
Yeah,
way that reality changes for them, you accept that what you thought was real wasn't real, and that's what
yeah.
brain injury taught me, and yeah, that the cool thing or I find it fascinating every time I talk to a new brain injury person, they're trying to explain, like, "I don't know how to explain this," and then they start talking about the things that shifted in them. Sometimes it's it'll be like attention or it'll be double vision, it'll be something that language problem, movement problem, something that's in the books, but sometimes it's not in the books, but the way they describe it is the same, and that's the key to I think I'm excited that I'm capturing this and also how to help people, how to get people to believe us. So that's
Yeah.
kind of the nature of my work nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, so get back to the point on whether or not
Yes.
every concussion is the same or different or head injury is the same or different. I've heard this statement, I think it was last year at a conference, that once you've seen one person with a brain injury, you've seen one person with a brain injury because yes, there are differences, but there are these themes that show up and there are
Yeah.
things that show up in patient over patient over patient that I see. Are they all exactly the same? No. There's this wide variety of symptoms that can show up. And everybody will have some part of that.
Right. And that I use a term, I guess I call it similar but different, but also
Yeah.
the nature of it has a although every brain injury is different and every person is different and the way every person deals with having that happen to them is different, there are for sure these parallels. And that's the thing I wanna capture and emphasize because it sort of gives a grounding and it gives a way, I think, for the outside world to believe us. If you look at, with research and hypothesis generation, it first has to start with observation and understanding to lead to questions. But I don't think they even or in my experience, many people don't even understand how to ask the right questions. And so I'm at the here, let me generate information that can help. But it really can help, like I'll talk to a brain injured person and they'll have movement problems and attention. And then it's like when I am walking across the kitchen, I cannot take in more information. The family's yelling at them, someone's talking, and it's like, just wait for them to finish walking. Walking is consuming that person's attention. And they will say it. I have a recording, this has happened more than once. And it's like, if the people around them understood that, that would help. And then some of the other people will describe a process where they're trying to work on something. And that reminds me then, like, of the things I had to repeat to do that process over and over and over to make it no longer so hard. It doesn't make it automatic. It just makes it a little bit easier. And then you do it enough so that you can do the next step. And that was the baby stepping that I had done over the years. And I can't remember it all, but I remember the generalities and I remember some very specifics. So I guess I gotta like try to dig into a story to to share it because it really did work. And when I improved, I didn't know I would improve. When I
Yeah.
recovery is not the right word, but when I gained to like 90, 95%, I didn't know that would happen. I was
Yeah.
ready for this fight to happen over and over. And then in the 5th to 7th year mark, these changes, the leveling up, I called it, where all of a sudden parts of me are back. And I was like, what is that? What is that? I have several recordings with people who describe the same process. And I'm like, that's the process other people need to know about to help others get to that stage. And there's a lot of interesting work with like AI and machine learning. And I can't remember the name in those models, but a good example with normal learning is the language when a child is learning language and they have like up to 100 words is very hard. And then there's like an explosion of language.
Mhm.
So I think that's a leveling up. And there's a similar process with machine learning that can happen where all of a sudden the AI and machine learning is doing something on its own, but it's a very slow. So I believe I had that. And I think I had that 8 times in that first 7
Mm.
years. So it was wild. It was
Mhm.
really like it was crazy. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
yeah. To get back to kind of an earlier point that you made, that's another thing is trying to figure out how many things you can do at once. So the person that couldn't walk through the kitchen and have conversations,
yeah.
I always said that I couldn't multitask anymore because
No.
tasking is
Yeah.
difficult.
Yes.
So you have to focus on the task at hand. There can be no divided attention in order to relearn and regain those skills.
Yes, and if you get to the stage where you can do the task, then the secondary task might be having music or having something that's
Mhm.
very because it's truly different with the way you explained it, it's like, yeah, you know what we're talking about, but I think for other people, it's so automatic that it's hard to think about that. I have several good podcasts where people describe this, and can I share, my future goal,
Yeah.
and I wasn't at this stage, but I'm at this stage now. I'm like, I'm gonna take all the podcasts and transcribe and pull out the pieces, and I think a combination of writing about it, showing the examples, and then sharing my story is how I see this being delivered in the future because it's more than a few examples, and it's
Mhm.
a similarity that if I can show it over and over, if you have 3 points making a line, there's likely something there, but if you have, like, 8 points making a line, it's like, okay, it's just, I don't know, I'm not for example, I'm not so good with technology, so I'm learning how to code, I'm learning how to get the transcripts and pull the pieces out, but it's just a slow process.
Yeah, it's all these different tasks that are skills that we get to learn differently because our brains work differently. Curious, did you end up in neuroscience because of your injury?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I didn't it's like I denied that to myself. I remember in retrospect, I remember taking my first neuroscience class, upper division in biology, and I was really struggling in biology classes, but I think that I did it because I had enjoyed it in high school, and I enjoyed physiology and chemistry in high school. So I thought, these are the pieces of me that this is what I would have done, and maybe I would have been pre-med, I don't know, but it was so hard, so because it was so hard, it became the goal, and then 3rd or 4th year in my undergrad, I was like, "What am I doing? Why am I doing this?" Beyond just trying to, like, rebuild the ability to do math, rebuild the ability to have these processes of thinking happening, and then when I hit the neuroscience classes, it was like my eyes opened up, and I remember it was a learning and memory class, and we're getting into the circuitry of the hippocampus, and I was like, "Okay, like, this is giving me clues into what I injured," and I had already rebuilt my cognition. I had already done the visual therapy I did was a lot of eye movement, but when my eyes were stuck because of the cranial nerve damage, they didn't move. So it was an effort to try to move the eyeballs. And I don't think it helped everyone in that experimental therapy, but it helped me. And it was an effort driven process. And so the cognitive rebuilding, the effort to get my eyes back was already this internal baby stepping. So I was like, what changed? I don't know how to make sense of this. So neuroscience showed me that. And then I just got deep into it and I actually really enjoyed it. So I was doing well in those classes. But I remember in the beginning trying to talk to these professors about brain injury. I did some internships. I went to the hospital. I tried to do this and it was always like that's what I mean by I was making sense of what happened to me
Mhm.
because I didn't have anyone else that I could talk to and no one was explaining it to me and no one was listening. So
Mhm.
yeah. And then after my undergrad, I was like, what do I do? So then I went to UCSD. I was a tech at a brain imaging lab. And that level, I thought that would be satisfying to learn about, but it's turns out there's a lot of coding and a lot of
Yeah.
machine sort of it wasn't what I thought. I ended up at this physiology level, with neurons, with live tissue in brain slices and in live animals recording, trying to just understand the brain. And as I understood enough, then I was like, okay, I'm already here. I thought I had to be something. I thought I had to be a professor. I thought I had to be, I don't know. And then after my postdoc, I realized it's always about brain injury. So that's the emotional time that hit me at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
long story, weird story.
Yeah, no, that's all right. I think it's funny from my story of it. I had been in neuroscience forever.
Yeah.
Looking back now, I had totally forgotten about this. My very first job as a nursing assistant was actually in a group home for adults with traumatic brain injury.
Oh, really?
And
Wow.
25 years later, here I was getting my own brain injury. So I came full circle in mine.
Wow.
So it's just interesting seeing how people get to where they are and what drives them. And this the personal experience absolutely gets you there.
Yeah. It
So
gives it purpose. It
it does.
gives it purpose too. That's kind of where I'm at. Yeah.
It does, yeah. So we're kind of coming up on toward the end of our time here. I just want to get a little bit of sense of kind of advice that you would give to people. So from all of the interviews that you've done and all the kind of data that you're starting to put together, do you have any advice for researchers or providers, like what they can do to listen or do things differently when they're taking
Mm.
care of somebody that has a brain injury?
Thought you were gonna say advice for brain injury people, but
Oh, that's gonna be my next question. Yeah.
this question is good because I actually don't know. I don't know how to think about what they are dealing with viewing us, but I would
Mm.
say believe us, give us the benefit of the doubt. In one of the first podcasts I did, the brain injury woman who had her brain injury when she was 2 and she's in her 60s, she said, be curious. And I think that so far, I've only met like 2 or 3 brain injury people that can't really explain. Most of them can explain, and it's like we're dead on. We're explaining things
Mhm.
accurately. So then if the outside world believes us and realizes that I think brain injury is different from other neurological conditions. There's a occlusion effect where other conditions have certain symptoms, certain problems, certain things that occlusion in the sense that if you shine a really bright light and then you try to shine another light, the smaller light's going to be missing. The laser pointer is going to be
Yeah.
missing because the bright light is what the outside world knows. They don't realize that we're dealing with something different. Across everyone I've talked to and across all of my understanding of it, brain injury is different and unique. And so give us the benefit of the doubt. Think of like maybe outside the boxes that are there. And also I think that listening to what I'm hoping to do is to listen to brain injured people can lead to the services and help that they need. And I don't know how it just keeps happening. People like default to what they know, default to what's out there.
Mhm.
Brain injury is not represented. Now it's starting to get represented, but that's in the last 5 years. And
Yeah.
they're only scratching the surface, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now the other side. What
Yeah.
advice would you give to somebody with a brain injury as they're going through the different phases?
Yeah. So, okay. The number one, recognizing that the phases exist is really crucial. I think the literature calls it evolution, but I think that there's a lot of problems in the beginning and the fatigue, the being so tired is a product of having a brain injury. So in the beginning, get as much rest as you can and accept the rest. People call it, recognizing your body or listening to your body, but it's like just getting that sleep, get ahead of, because most people hit a limit or hit a point where they can't function. It's beneficial to do the rest before you get to that point, almost avoid that point from happening. I like how you're nodding because it took me 4 years to realize that. And then once I did, I was like, wow, I'm actually really improving. And it's so long, it's so stretched out. Like I think of it like development is a good, like the first 5 years of a child's life is kind of like this is in scale of months and years. And then it's gonna have that slowness. I don't know how if we can get around that. Maybe in a perfect world, if everyone had all these resources and all these supports and all these other things, then it would shorten that time duration. And then the other thing is, this is what I talk to brain injury people. I'm like, are your problems? What are you dealing with? And then that becomes your core problems to learn how to slowly improve and also not make it worse. Because if you make it worse, like I can't think. So I would try to have a complex thought. And I remember it was like turning the ignition of the effort would put me in bed for 3 days. And that's how I was in the beginning. So I had to learn to stop doing that. But I was so angry at being in that situation. So just learning what your problems are and then slowly improve them, slowly try to find ways that make it better, which includes sleep, diet, all these other healthy for your brain aspects, nutrition, finding a way to, have that outlet, physical activity if you can. But there's like, these are your problems and slowly expand it and don't make it worse because we can make it worse so easily. I guess that's the advice. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then where can people find the projects that you're working on?
So right now I only have I have the podcast. It's called Experiencing My Brain. And I'm gonna put it's on Apple and Spotify and iHeartRadio, but I'm gonna do something where I get it out to more networks, but it's called Experiencing My Brain. And I urge people, I realize it's long. These discussions are long. I'll sit
Yeah.
with one woman, her and I met at the 40-year mark of her brain injury, and it's just like this dumping out of so much information, but they're worth it. They're really, really worth it because I can't do a short interview with somebody when they're pouring their heart out, telling me all
Yeah.
about their brain injury problems, but they all are really good at explaining their problems, which is the awesome part. And then how it improved, how they progressed, and important stories. So they're long, but they're worth it. And then the Building Brain Awareness talk series, that's on YouTube. And that's the good thing about that is, I find an expert that's studying something or, like alexithymia or certain views, and then they deliver it and they talk about it in a lecture format, but the audience are brain injured. So the discussion that
Mhm.
happens is the discussion that I think needs to happen. And so
Mhm.
that's the two formats I have. I don't know, I'm going to do either a blog or some other format where I can start to connect the dots. But those are the two things I have out now. So YouTube
Perfect.
channel and podcast.
Perfect. That's a great place to start with that.
Thank you.
So, as we wrap up today, I just want to thank you so much for being here. Are there any last words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our wisdom?
Wisdom. I think with brain injury, I used to think of it like a completely different than any other problem, but I realize it's a human problem. It's maybe the most human problem because we all have brains, and if you get hit in the head, it can happen. So I think, I don't know, just what I said before, listen to the brain injury people, give them the benefit of the doubt. And also that progression is really wild because when I was in that toddler phase, if I didn't have the help that I got, I may have just stayed like that, and then I'd probably be homeless or worse, and I don't know. So that progression, which the way it happened was so strange, but I've met enough people that has happened. I believe that's the nature of this. So offer that support and keep it over the long term. And people really do change because of the brain injury, but it's like, I guess it's okay. I'm learning how to deal with the emotions and the healing around it. I was so focused on fixing myself. It was driven from shame. It was driven from this need to be what I thought I needed to be. But there's a lot of healing, and people find ways to, they're a new person and then they become okay with it. That's amazing to me. I don't know how someone can do that, but there's a lot of really good stories, and it's a healthier way of dealing with this. So there's a lot of good stuff out there. And yeah, I'm just trying to add this I see as a very important piece to brain injury, but it's just a piece of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate your piece. You have done an amazing job of
Thank you.
recreating your brain and doing something with that unfortunate accident that you had to make a difference for other people in the TBI community as well.
Thank you. And maybe in the future I can interview you, and it's always about what are you dealing with, and then the story that fits around that. So I'd love to do that. And
I would be glad to. Yeah.
great. Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Daniel.
All right.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to subscribe, leave a comment, and share it so that others can benefit. Please also consider supporting the show by buying me a coffee. The link is in the show notes. You can also go to www.brainwellnesssolutions.com to catch the latest info and get links on all of the social medias there. See you next time.